I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with one of my greatest friends in life, Mirabai Starr, whose work I am sure you know, and if you don't know, plunge into it. It's some of the most wonderful work of our time. Mirabai has been for several decades now, not only a great translator of the works of beings like St. John of the Cross and Julian of Norwich. She's also in her own books, Wild Mercy and Caravan of No Despair and God is Love, amongst others, she has been able to pioneer a new sacred feminine way from us. And she's now plunged into another book on ordinary mysticism, which promises to be her best yet and her most subtly and quietly radical. We've just done this huge year of the global immersion, mystical immersion for Shift. And actually, we finished it yesterday, so we're both a bit punch drunk. But Mirabai has graciously consented to plunge into Love is Everything, the new book that I've just published of the grand, amazing, sublime work of Hadewijch, which is how you pronounce her apparently, Hadewijch of Antwerp, which is having the most sensational response. I never imagined that publishing a book of a 13th century Beguine would get everybody riled up in the most gorgeous way, but in fact it has happened. And this voice of this sublime woman, which was silenced for 6 centuries, is now resounding in our spiritual world. So Mirabai, thank you so much for agreeing to be with me. She began a new class last night too on the shift, just immediately after we finished. So it's especially gracious of her to do this for me and with me now. Hello, darling. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you. Thank you.
Oh, and thank you for the invitation. I've been thinking about this ever since the book came out. So it's
And
this
it's dedicated to you, sweetheart.
that's
So it
right.
comes to you with all the love of my heart and all the big, wild, fiery love of Hadewijch's heart.
Thank you, Andrew. I've never had anyone dedicate a book to me. I am taking that into every fiber of my being with great gratitude.
Well, this has got to stop. All books from now on, I ordain, should be dedicated to you.
From your mouth to the goddess's ears, Andrew.
How has Hadvig struck you? What did you immediately feel when you met this woman who's been so ignored, so
Mm.
silenced? What did you feel when you held her in your hands and allowed her to speak to you as a woman, pioneer, mystic?
Yes, I mean, my favorites are the ones that have been buried and discounted. And so I've actually known about Hadvik
Of
for
course,
quite
yeah.
some time, and Hedwig is the way her name was conveyed to me, Hedwig, so who knows?
Well,
But
Hadaveg is the, apparently, I've been corrected, that's the way to say it in Middle Dutch, but
okay,
there are
good,
many ways of saying the wonderful one.
good to know. So when I first encountered her, it was in the context of a mystic who called God love. Love
Mm,
was God's name for Hedwig. And that spoke to me completely in a very penetrating way. I mean, it says in the Gospels of Jesus, God is love. It's not a new concept, but Hedwig took it to the extreme,
right.
and love was her name. So God was not only love for Hedwig, but also uh, she. Her name is love. And so,
Love is feminine too. It's Dame Love in Margaret Poreta. The Beguines recognized that love was the feminine evolutionary power in God. This was a revolution. And of
yeah,
course, they paid for it. Yeah.
they did pay for it.
Mm,
And it didn't manage to infiltrate the church in any way, except insofar as the church is known as she. That's as
right.
far as it gets. But so by the time your translation came into my hands, Andrew, I had a tender place for Hedwig, and I had read her a little bit, but now I just felt like I had been invited to a banquet. and I feasted on her. It was very difficult to pick out just a few things to share today, but I did distill my favorites, of course, based on their rootedness in the body.
Yes. I think this is one of the really astounding originalities of the Beguines, isn't it? This was a group of women who lived and thrived only for about 120 years. At first, the Boys Club let them flourish. They weren't married. They got out of that concentration camp and they didn't want to go into convents. And I found today, reading this wonderful essay of Maria Lichtman's, I found this wonderful quotation from uh, an extraordinary, oh, where is he? It says, where is it? Of course, I can't find it, but basically, he says that in a world of pleasure seeking, they were pure. In a world of cruelty, they were kind. In a world of dogma, they were free. And
Mm.
these amazing women erupted into mystical revelation in the 13th century. And Hadewijch was part of that first Beguine spring. And then, of course, the whole thing ended with the burning of Margaret Porete in 1310. But for those miraculous years, there were independent, wild, holy women writing out of the depths of their own mystical experience and stressing the oneness of the soul and the body.
And that's why they were so committed to justice, to acts of compassionate service in the world, because for them there
Exactly.
was no difference between the sacred and the worldly, that the best expression of is the passionate love for God. In the case of Hadvik, it was such passion. The natural expression of that love is to serve each other, to recognize that we belong to this world.
And they also, I think they pissed off the Boys Club royally because they wrote in their original languages. And the language of the church was Latin, which kept the Boys Club completely privileged and separate. And here were these astounding women, sometimes forging their own languages. Hadewijks writing in medieval Flemish, late medieval Flemish, created basically the Flemish language and made available the highest mystical truths to so-called ordinary people. Well, the church didn't like this at all. And Mechtilde of Magdeburg did the same thing, and so
And
did
Julian
Beatrice of Nazareth.
of Norwich helped
Exactly.
create the English language, the first woman to write in English. And she
Oh,
coined certain terms. Matthew Fox tells me enjoy. The word enjoy came from Julian of Norwich.
wow, what a wonderful contribution. It's the key to the unity of the body and soul. Enjoy.
Enjoy. And so I think the reason the church did not bother the Beguines for as long as they didn't was because they were lay women. They were outside of the church. They took vows, but they weren't monastics. They took
Right.
a vow. They created a rule of life to live in their communities, and that rule of life blended contemplative practice and service in the world. So they kind of did their own thing and didn't bother anybody until their teachings began to ripple through their communities with such power that people began to get ideas.
Began to feel free to have their own mystical experiences and interpret scripture with a freedom outside the control of the church. That was not allowed.
And to have women leading the way, it's very dangerous. So I love, Andrew, that you, as always, are lifting up the voices of the feminine and
Oh,
sharing
yeah.
with us.
I think the single most important fact of our time is the return of the divine feminine and her majesty and her fury and her sweetness and her peace. And I think obviously it's the great women mystics who can guide us the most powerfully into this. So nothing gives me more joy than translating Hadewijch, and now I'm plunged into Elizabeth of the Trinity. So I'm going to be for the rest of my life with the women mystics. This is my destiny. I'm so thrilled. And having been with you for this year and learned so much from not only what you said, which was very beautiful, but how you are and how you treat everybody and how you really walk your talk of embodied tenderness and embodied compassion has only increased my admiration for the enormous contribution that women like yourself now are making to our spiritual world. Thank you so, so, so much.
Thank you for saying that, Andrew. So many of us are up to this monkey business.
This is the game in town. This is the
It is.
best game in town. Read us something you love, darling.
How about Love is Everything, page 51?
Mm.
Um, so this is January 30th, because this book, for those of you who are not, who don't have the context, is 365 poems, visions, and contemplations. So it's a year with Hadewijch that Andrew very, very carefully and lovingly curated for us. Oh, my friends, you turn far little to love, and love is always capitalized. Oh, my friends, you've turned far too little to love. That love that keeps thrashing me with terrible transports and unslaked passion. My heart, my soul, my senses can find no peace, even for an hour, by day as well as night. She could be any of the Sufi women mystics, any of the Hindu women mystics, men too, but that, Mirabai, my namesake, spoke about by night, by day, Krishna gives me no peace. This love gives me no peace. The flame keeps blazing in the marrow of my soul. Once I heard a sermon where St. Augustine was spoken of. While I listened, I felt I was erupting into flames from the inside. And this was so overwhelming, I believed the whole earth was going to burn to ash. Love is everything. Love is everything. And that's the
Oh,
title of the book that Andrew chose. It couldn't be more perfect. And I was just thinking about Teresa of Avila, who spoke quite often, especially in the book of my life, her autobiography, about she'd be just innocently having a conversation with someone, and they would mention something that a saint said or that Jesus said in the Gospels, and suddenly just hearing that, she it would ignite her, and she'd burst into flames internally, and she'd go into a transport and would be gone, and it was very inconvenient and embarrassing for her. But it was like that. These stories would trigger a full mystical rapture. Now,
and
so I,
don't you think that's why the Boys Club got so annoyed? Because they want everything to be controlled and reasonable and clear and pure of emotion. And here, the great women mystics are saying, no, the key is passion. And once you are possessed by that terrible transports of unslaked passion, you're not going to be in control. Love is going to control you. That was not in their agenda.
exactly. That's it. That's it. To let love, she have the reins on this journey. So, should I read another?
Oh, yes,
Okay, I'm going to read three little short, very earthy pieces because I
please.
want to share Hadewijch's great love of creation. The mystics are not all about transcendence and transport and rapture. I mean, yes, they are very much about that, but it's an mystical experience, a unitive experience that brings them home to the body and home to to their connection to earth and to other beings. It's a big difference.
Especially the great women mystics.
That's right, a big difference between the.
Right, because a lot of the men mystics love to go off into the light and stay there, but the girls come down and show that everything is irradiated by light.
Because we are.
Love is everything.
Love
Right.
is everything. We have a lot to do here. I wouldn't
Yes.
mind transporting off into the ethers myself, but
But
There's
there's laundry and children and dogs and strange relations. Hmm.
okay. Page 205, which is June 18th, is yeah, June 18th. Dew, D-E-W, dew. Dew too is a name that love works with. When fire has devoured everything in its holy violence, the dew falls,
Hmm.
spreading healing moisture like a strong wind of unheard of sweetness. This summons the kiss of noble natures and makes them constant in storms of change. So the fires sweep through the landscape of the soul, and then the soul is kissed by dew and replenished and nourished. The Holy One, love, would never leave us just scorched.
So beautiful. I was just thinking as you were reading of a medieval hymn to the Virgin, which goes something like this: I sing of a maiden who is mackeless, king of all kings, to her son she chess. She came to where he was, like dew in April that falls on the grass. So the Virgin and the feminine power in that wonderful, wonderful hymn is like dew in April that falls on the grass, something that comes from the transcendent but cools the great sufferings that sometimes go along with mystical awakening. That dew of the divine mother that falls to cool. So beautiful. Another one, please.
Okay. Sap, page 119.
I'm so pleased you pick up this side of Hadewijch too, because it's easy when you read her to think that she's just a hurricane of flame because she's so passionate, but she has a wonderful balance.
Yes, she does.
Mm.
April 5th, page 119. Before long, sap will rush upward from the roots. Through its power, all around, fields and plants will glow green. Doesn't she sound like Hildegard here?
Yes.
Fields and plants will glow green. We know this for certain. The one who does battle with love will carry her off if she flinches from nothing. Whoever risks all for sublime love's sake is adamant in all her works. Love is noble virgin and queen. When she graces anyone, grandeur of mind she adds to all the good she gives.
Mm.
Force, passion, courage, discernment. So love honors her word. However wild love is at first, it is she who will tame her. So this reminds me so much of you, Andrew, because you speak so much about these times, these apocalyptic times, as difficult and painful and confusing as they are, being the divine design, the plan of the Great Mother.
The birthing chamber. Yeah.
Birthing chamber, she, and that this is, it is she who is giving birth, it is we who are giving birth to her, and she's the one who created this, and she is the one who will carry us through safely. But it's not just
Absolutely.
a tortuous situation that has no purpose and no redemption. That to just put ourselves in her hands and trust that this wild dance has a, a wildly creative conclusion. If we could only say yes. And
As Hadewijch says, is if you can bear it and if you can submit yourself to love's fierce and strange commands, then you'll be rewarded by grandeur of mind, in which you will be shown that the most terrible things that are happening are not meaningless. They're part of a purification and a shedding and a burning away of the old, so that something unimaginably beautiful can be born in the human race and in its power, in a new power to change everything. That's so much why I wanted to translate her, to bring her out, because she knows from her own agonizing, ecstatic, and transfiguring experience that love can seem absolutely crazy and terrifying at times as it works its miraculous birth. But if you can hang in there and let love have its way with you, then love will birth you as a divine human being and give you extraordinary new powers to co-create with love the birth of a new creation, a new world, a new system of everything. Hadewijch experienced that herself, and that's what the poems all come from, that utter faith in love's working, not out of blind religiosity, but out of having gone through the turbulent, amazing experience and realize that it ends not in extinction, but in resurrection.
mm.
Amazing.
and
She
she
knew that.
and she considers it to be a great adventure, a grand adventure.
She
You know,
also howls and screams at moments, doesn't she? I mean, she's absolutely naked about the suffering, but she never stays there. She goes through it, beyond it, into the birth again and again and again. But unlike the male mystics who pretend not to suffer, who don't want to talk about feelings, she, like the empowered woman she is absolutely honest about everything, price as well as the glory. And that's why she can help us so much as we're going through this great mother ordained, mother fueled transformation.
mm,
Amazing, huh?
yes.
Read to us, darling. Read. I love listening to you read Hadewijch. I've been reading it to myself, so it's wonderful to hear it on your voice. Oh,
Thank you. May 14th, page 163. Just as lit wood becomes fire, so the soul, burnt by him, becomes him. Let's do this as a little Lectio Divina. Read it.
you start. It's
Yeah,
so perfect. It's almost the whole of mysticism in one short poem, isn't it?
it is. And many mystics use the same imagery. And we can talk about
Mm,
that after. After I'm going to read it 3 times. So that was one. Just as lit wood becomes fire, so the soul, burnt by him, becomes him.
mm,
So breathing that in and breathing that out. Just as lit wood becomes fire, so the soul, burnt by him, becomes him.
ah,
John of the Cross also talks about this very image of the the log that is thrown onto the fire. At first the water has to be driven out, so any moisture that's still in that log has to be driven out by the flames, and then the wood really catches fire, and then the wood becomes the fire. So there's this whole process, and that part where there's still moisture in us that needs to be um, evaporated can be painful. But becoming fire, that's when there is no subject object distinction. that remains, and we are that which burns. We're the fire and we're the, the burning. And we are lover and we are beloved, but then really ultimately all that's left is love.
Yeah. And in so many ways, as you were reading, I thought, oh, that's who Hadewijch is. She is the voice of that fire,
Yeah.
the female Christed voice of that fire.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any, for me, there's no other poet but Rumi that expresses that the burning and the revelation so cleanly, clearly, vibrantly, without any kind of shame, without any kind of fear, just as she does it. So amazing.
And yet we know she suffered, right? We don't know much about her life at all.
Oh,
There's
she suffered terribly, yeah.
biographical information, but we gather that she was probably wealthy, privileged woman, although no women were privileged, but she was born into nobility. She was educated, highly educated in literature and probably in theology, which was rare.
Certainly in theology, yeah.
Yeah. And and yet at some and so she was able to write in the vernacular. And she was able to write with some authority, but at some point she was driven out like the moisture in the burning log of her community, maybe even. I mean, she was probably the head of her community, right? Her Beguine community,
Yes.
and somehow was sent away, probably by the authorities and not by her own community, because there was no sense of betrayal by her sisters necessarily. But she ended up, I think, spending a lot of her life homeless.
Homeless and may well have died in a leper colony as an unpaid helper. I mean, it was a frightening life, and you can tell that from the poems. And yet, look what flowered in it. What flowered in it was a unique vision of being Christed in heart, mind, soul, and body. She,
Hmm.
like Mary Magdalene, loved Jesus with her whole being, and that love transformed her whole being. And again, she brings the body into it, into a living flame of presence. That's her unique contribution, I think.
Yes, that's right. And people talk about the women mystics as sublimating sexual love for divine love. It's not sublimation for me. It is
Oh,
direct love of the beloved.
yes.
Nothing sublimated.
Sublimation, what you there's nothing sublimated in that. It's just another level of passion, isn't it?
Um,
Everything is ablaze, but it's all ablaze through the heart, through the adoring heart. So,
and bodies involved. Teresa Mother
yes,
talks
yes.
about the angel plunging the flaming sword or flaming arrow into her womb, basically, and withdrawing it and plunging it in again, and so on. That she said, I have to admit, the body had a large part to play in this vision.
Well, there was a wicked old cardinal who saw the sculpture by Bernini and said, well, if this is ecstasy, I too have experienced it.
Really?
Yes. But that was the boys' club way of putting it down. But I think anyone who's had an experience of the enormous passion at the heart of God knows that that passion leaves nothing out when you experience it. Every kind of joy, physical, emotional, spiritual, burns in that fire together with an intensity that is just, which is really indescribable. But thank God we have people like Hadewijch that take us close to it so that we can realize it is the goal of being alive.
Yes.
Read one more. I can't bear to let you go without you reading one more. I just want to hear it on your voice.
Oh, I would love to. All right, how about page 131, April 15th?
Mm.
The dark strangers call me mad, a heretic beyond salvation. Love says, let them say what they want. I am God's eternal fire and know how you burn. Love says, let them say what they want. I am God's eternal fire and know how you burn. The dark strangers call me mad, a heretic beyond salvation, but love says, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
I know who you are. You know who I am. I know what it costs you to love love, and it's worth it. Love is everything.
Haven't you had that voice in your vocation? People trying to tell you that you were in not necessarily in those words, but because when an authentic woman mystic stands up and says, "Look, it's not just about floating off, it's about arriving here in the full, calm, sacred passion of the light and infusing everything we do and everything we say with that light." The Boys Club doesn't like it. They want their transcendence neat. And you must have met that voice in all kinds of different ways, haven't you?
Oh, I certainly have. Although in my case,
That was
it's
a leading question.
yes, I gathered. In my case, it's been more a matter of men explaining stuff to me.
Oh, yeah.
So
Of which
when
I've
I,
also been guilty, yeah.
oh no, no, you're nothing like what I'm talking about, where I'll be giving a talk and a man, disguised as someone asking a question, proceeds to educate me about things that I've been immersed in my entire and have written about and published about as if I'd never considered such a thing. For instance, Mirabai, um, God is beyond gender. So when you
Ah,
speak about the feminine face of the divine, really you're just contributing to duality, things like that. So
oh,
that's my version of the contemporary attack on me as mad. But my namesake, Mirabai, got a lot of that
oh
suffered
my God.
from people who called her crazy and dangerous. And Rabia of Basra, the 9th century Sufi mystic, and Lala of Kashmir, medieval Kashmiri mystic. That so many of the women were accused. I mean, Teresa was investigated by the Inquisition. Of course, she was born in 1515. It wasn't that long after the expulsion in Spain of Jews and Muslims, and Teresa had Jewish blood, so she was very much suspect. And so when she started having Teresa of Avila, I'm speaking of for those of you who didn't catch that, when she started having visions, she was reported to the Spanish Inquisition, and they investigated her very thoroughly, as that in case she was being deluded by the devil. That was the nice way of accusing her of
Which
being
was obviously more her lot, being a woman. Yes, she could
right.
easily be deluded by the devil, yeah.
Exactly. So she said, don't bother, guys. You don't need to, because I'm already inquiring into every single one of these experiences, these visions, the voices, the raptures and ecstasies that I experience. I too am concerned that I might be being deluded by the devil or that I might be losing my mind. And so I go through this process of deeply asking and being willing to listen to whatever the internal response is. And her main criterion for whether or not her visions were valid, were true, were gifts from God, is the way she put it, is if her heart was expanded with
Right.
more love for God. Then it was obvious. They couldn't touch her. She had her answer.
I'd like to end our wonderful time by reading one for you, which goes
Please.
to something at the heart of you as I've come to know you, which is your great love for the nothing, which seems so paradoxical. Here you are, very much a deep embodied mystic who draws her inspiration from all of the great traditions. And yet you do, and also you have, as I have, this overwhelming love for the formless, for the one beyond the one, for what can never be put into words.
Yes.
And one of the things that we've shared so deeply together is how this love is the ultimate paradoxical love, because it's as you get closer through grace to the no thing, that everything appears in its ultimate beauty and sacredness. And you suddenly realize that all of the categories that separate body from soul, ordinary from extraordinary, mean absolutely nothing. Because out of the nothing, everything comes, and the everything is soaked and saturated with the nothing.
Yes.
That, in honor of that and of you, I'd love to read the last poem, which really does remind me of you. So this is from Hadewijch, from Andy to Mirabai. All hail, primordial source in ourselves that gives us noble divine knowledge and feeds us always renewed love and detaches us in your wisdom from every external accident. The unity of the naked truth, abolishing all reason, holds me in this emptiness and forms me to the simple nature of the eternity of the eternal essence. Here of all thinking, I am stripped bare. Those who have never truly understood scripture would never know through reason how to explain what I have found in myself. Boundless, no veil remaining, above all words. That's in that mirror. I hope you see the beauty of your no face, because that's the beauty that radiates from your teaching. That's the beauty that I have seen. So deeply inspired by help. Thank you. Thank
Thank you, Andrew. What a gift.